When my boss demoted me to make room for his unqualified nephew, I thought my career was over, but what I discovered in those company files turned a simple case of workplace nepotism into a federal investigation that brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal empire. 8 years of loyalty meant nothing to Marcus Lehnsher, but his biggest mistake was underestimating just how far I'd go to uncover the truth, and the look on his face when the FBI finally cornered him in that boardroom was worth every sleepless night it took to get there. The security camera above Marcus Lehnsher's door caught everything that happened next, though I didn't know it at the time. My hands were still shaking from rage when I walked into his corner office that Tuesday morning, expecting our usual project update meeting. Instead, Marcus sat behind his massive desk with a smirk that made my stomach drop before he even opened his mouth. "Close the door, Jake," he said without looking up from his computer screen. The morning sun streamed through his floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor of his executive suite. 8 years I'd been walking into this office for meetings, 8 years of building Xavier Storm Industries' marketing department from a 3-person team into a powerhouse that generated 40% of our revenue. Marcus finally raised his eyes to meet mine, and I saw something cold there that made me grip my coffee mug tighter. "We're making some changes around here. Big changes." He leaned back in his leather chair, the same one he'd bragged cost more than most people's cars. "Your position as senior marketing director is being eliminated. We're bringing in fresh leadership." The words hit me like a physical blow. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the floor, sending hot liquid spreading across the expensive marble. "What are you talking about, Marcus? We just landed the Henderson Industries account last month. Our social media engagement is up 300% this quarter. Exactly why we need someone with more vision to take things to the next level," Marcus said, standing up and smoothing down his tailored suit. "My nephew Scott just finished his business studies. Harvard graduate, top 10% of his class. Kid's got fresh ideas and the energy to implement them." Fresh ideas. I'd heard Marcus use that phrase before when he wanted to get rid of people who asked too many questions. Last year, it was Jennifer from accounting who noticed discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Before that, it was David from human resources who questioned some of Marcus's expense claims. Both of them were gone within a month, their positions mysteriously eliminated due to budget cuts. "So what exactly are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would destroy everything I'd worked for. "You'll be transitioning to marketing coordinator. Same department, different focus. Scott will be taking over as director next Monday." Marcus walked around his desk and stood over me, using his height advantage like he always did when he wanted to intimidate someone. "I'm sure you'll help him get up to speed on how things work around here." The coffee was still spreading across the floor, seeping into the cracks between the marble tiles. I bent down to pick up the pieces of my broken mug, partly to clean up the mess and partly to hide the fury burning in my face. 8 years of 60-hour weeks of building relationships with clients Marcus couldn't even name, of creating campaigns that saved this company during the recession when half our competitors went under. "This is about the Frost Industries presentation, isn't it?" I said, standing back up with ceramic shards cutting into my palm. "You're still angry that I went directly to their board instead of letting you handle the pitch." Marcus's face darkened. "That presentation was a team effort and you made it look like your personal victory. That kind of grandstanding doesn't play well with upper management." Team effort. I'd worked alone for 3 weeks on that presentation while Marcus was on vacation in the Bahamas. The Frost Industries contract was worth $12 million annually, and everyone in the company knew I'd landed it single-handedly. But Marcus had taken credit during the board meeting, claiming his strategic guidance had made the deal possible. "I have documentation of my work on that project," I said carefully. "Email chains, draft presentations with timestamps, client meeting notes. Everything's properly recorded in our project management system." Something flickered across Marcus's face then, quick as lightning but unmistakable. Fear. He recovered quickly, but I'd seen it. Jake, I think you're getting a little too emotional about this. Change is hard for everyone, but it's necessary for growth. Emotional. Another one of Marcus's favorite words for dismissing legitimate concerns. He'd used it on Jennifer when she questioned the expense reports. He'd used it on David when human resources policies were ignored. Now he was using it on me. When does this transition happen? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger burning in my chest. Scott starts Monday morning. You'll spend this week documenting your current projects and preparing handover materials. Marcus returned to his desk and sat down, already dismissing me. I trust you'll handle this transition professionally. Professionally, as if demoting your most successful employee to make room for an unqualified relative was professional. As if destroying someone's career advancement was just another business decision. As if 8 years of loyalty and results meant nothing compared to family connections. I walked toward the door, still carrying the broken pieces of my coffee mug. The ceramic shards were warm in my palm, and I could feel a small cut bleeding where one sharp edge had pressed too deep. At the doorway, I turned back to look at Marcus, who was already typing on his computer as if our conversation had never happened. Marcus, I said quietly, you might want to reconsider this decision. There are things about this company's operations that only I know. Client relationships, project histories, vendor connections, things that can't be easily transferred. He looked up with that same cold smile. I'm sure Scott will figure it out. He's very smart, very capable. Sometimes fresh eyes see opportunities that experienced people miss. Fresh eyes. Capable. I wondered if Marcus really believed his nephew was qualified, or if he just didn't care. Either way, his dismissive attitude told me everything I needed to know about how this company really valued its employees. Walking back to my office, I could feel other people's eyes following me. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and I was sure rumors were already spreading about my meeting with Marcus. By lunchtime, everyone would know that Jake Ryerson had been demoted to make room for the boss's nephew. My office felt smaller somehow as I sat down at my desk and stared at the awards lining my bookshelf. Marketing Campaign of the Year from the National Business Association. Client Satisfaction Excellence from the Metro Chamber of Commerce. Innovation in Digital Strategy from the Regional Marketing Council. 8 years of recognition for work that Marcus was now handing over to someone who'd probably never run a real marketing campaign in his life. But as I sat there surrounded by evidence of my professional achievements, something shifted. Inside me, the initial shock and hurt were hardening into something more focused, more dangerous. Marcus thought he could dismantle my career with a casual conversation and a few dismissive comments. He thought his family connections made him untouchable. What Marcus didn't realize was that 8 years in this company had taught me more than just marketing strategies. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. I knew which clients were really profitable and which ones Marcus kept around for personal reasons. Knew which expense reports contained questionable charges and which vendor relationships involved suspicious kickbacks. Marcus Lehnsher had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and he didn't even know it. Yet, the elevator doors opened on the security department's floor, and I could hear Logan Howlett's gravelly voice echoing down the hallway before I even saw him. He was on the phone speaking, in the low, measured tones that meant serious business. Logan had been head of security at Xavier Storm Industries for 15 years, and nothing happened in this building without him knowing about it. Yeah, I'll look into it, Logan was saying as I approached his office door. Something doesn't smell right about the whole situation. He looked up and saw me standing there, then wrapped up his call quickly. Jake, heard you had an interesting morning. Word really did travel fast around here. Logan gestured for me to come in and close the door. Behind me, his office was completely different from Marcus's polished executive suite. Steel. Filing cabinets lined the walls, multiple computer monitors displayed security camera feeds, and everything had the functional, no-nonsense feel of someone who dealt with real problems, instead of corporate politics. "Let me guess," Logan said, leaning back in his chair. "Marcus gave you the speech about fresh leadership and new directions. Same script he used on Jennifer Martinez and David Chin." The mention of those names made my stomach tighten. "You think this is part of a pattern? Kid, I've been watching Marcus operate for years. Every time someone gets too close to information he doesn't want examined, they suddenly become expendable." Logan pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. Jennifer was asking questions about expense reports that didn't match submitted receipts. David was looking into hiring practices that might not have followed proper procedures. And you just landed the biggest client contract in company history, without Marcus's direct involvement. I sat down across from Logan's desk, my mind racing. "So you think he's getting rid of people who might expose something?" "I think Marcus Lehnsher has been running his own little kingdom inside this company, and anyone who threatens that kingdom gets eliminated." Logan opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. "Take a look at these." The papers were copies of expense reports, vendor contracts, and personnel files. At first glance, they looked like normal business documents, but Logan started pointing out details that made my pulse quicken. Payments to consulting firms that had no website or business address. Travel expenses for trips that weren't reflected in Marcus's calendar. Hiring decisions that bypassed normal human resources procedures. "This goes back 3 years, Logan explained. "Small amounts at first, then getting bigger as Marcus got more confident. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in questionable transactions." I studied the documents more carefully, my marketing background helping me spot inconsistencies that might not be obvious to someone else. "These vendor payments don't make sense. Why would we pay Cyclops Consulting $15,000 monthly when I've never heard of them? And look at these travel receipts. Marcus claimed business trips to cities where we don't have clients or prospects." "Exactly. And here's the interesting part." Logan pulled out another set of papers. "Scott Summers, Marcus's nephew, the Harvard graduate who's taking your job. Want to guess what I found when I ran a background check?" My hands were shaking slightly as I reached for the documents. Scott's employment application showed impressive credentials. Harvard Business School graduate with a focus on digital marketing. Previous experience at 2 major advertising agencies in New York. References from senior executives at companies I recognized. "Looks legitimate," I said, though something felt off about the whole package. That's what Marcus wants everyone to think. But I called Harvard's registrar office yesterday. They have no record of Scott Summers graduating from their business school. In fact, they have no record of him ever being enrolled there. Logan's eyes were hard as steel. "Those advertising agencies he supposedly worked for? One of them closed down 5 years ago, and the other one has never heard of him." The implications hit me like a freight train. Marcus falsified his nephew's resume? Gets better. Those references he listed? 2 of them are phone numbers that go straight to voicemail boxes registered under fake names. The third one is a number that belongs to a gambling addiction counselor in Atlantic City. Logan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think Scott Summers has some serious problems that Uncle Marcus has been covering up." I stared at the forged documents, my anger building into something white-hot and focused. "So, Marcus demoted me, destroyed my career advancement, and handed my job to someone who's completely unqualified and probably unstable. That's just the beginning. Look at this." Logan pulled out a bank statement that made my blood run cold. Cyclops Consulting, that mysterious vendor getting $15,000 a month? The bank account is registered to Scott Summers. Marcus has been funneling company money directly to his nephew for over a year. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was worse than simple nepotism. Marcus wasn't just giving his nephew a job. He was using Xavier Storm Industries as his personal piggy bank to solve Scott's problems, whatever they were, and anyone who might discover this arrangement was systematically removed from positions where they could cause trouble. "Logan, why are you showing me this? You could take this to the board yourself." "Because I need someone with access to the marketing department's financial records. Someone who understands client relationships and vendor management. Someone who has legitimate reasons to be asking questions about company operations." Logan's smile was sharp as a blade. "Marcus just handed us the perfect inside man by keeping you in the marketing department." The plan started forming in my mind even as Logan was speaking. My new position as marketing coordinator would actually give me access to different types of information than I'd had as senior director. Lower-level employees often saw details that management missed. And if I was careful about how I gathered evidence, Marcus would never see me coming. What about Scott? If he's really as unstable as his background suggests, putting him in charge of major client relationships could be dangerous for the company. That's the beauty of Marcus's plan backfiring. Scott's going to crash and burn all on his own. We just need to document everything when it happens. Logan started gathering up the papers. "But Jake, you need to understand something. If we're right about the scope of what Marcus has been doing, this isn't just about recovering your job. This could bring down his entire operation." The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt energized. For the first time since walking out of Marcus's office, I had a sense of purpose that went beyond personal revenge. This was about protecting the company I'd given 8 years of my life to build. "There's one more thing," Logan said, pulling out a small recording device. "I've been documenting some of Marcus's conversations. Nothing illegal, just standard security protocols for executive meetings. But some of the things he said about handling problem employees might be very interesting to the right people." He pressed play and Marcus's voice filled the room. The recording was from last week. Apparently a phone conversation with someone whose voice I didn't recognize. "The Jake situation is under control," Marcus was saying. "I'll have him moved to a position where he can't cause problems, and Scott will be in place to handle any client questions. If Jake tries to make noise about the transition, we'll just say he couldn't handle the pressure of increased responsibilities." The other voice responded, but it was too muffled to make out clearly. Then Marcus again. "Don't worry about the documentation. Jake's too much of a team player to cause real trouble. He'll complain for a week and then settle into his new role like a good little soldier." Good little soldier. The condescension in Marcus's voice made my jaw clench. He'd planned this whole thing, calculated my response, and expected me to just accept the destruction of my career without fighting back. Logan turned off the recording. "Marcus seriously underestimated you, didn't he?" "Yes, he did. And that's going to be his biggest mistake." I stood up from my chair, my mind already working through the possibilities. "Logan, I'm going to need copies of everything you just showed me. And I'm going to need your help accessing some information that my new position might not normally include." "You got it, kid. But we need to be smart about this. Marcus has been playing this game for years and he's got connections throughout the company. One wrong move and we could both end up like Jennifer and David." As I walked back toward the elevator, the broken pieces of my coffee mug still cutting into my palm, I realized that Marcus had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible. By underestimating my intelligence and my determination, he'd revealed the scope of his corruption to exactly the wrong person. Marcus Lehnsher thought he'd neutralized a threat to his operation. Instead, he just created his worst nightmare. Scott Summers walked into the marketing department Monday morning like he owned the place, which I suppose he thought he did. His expensive suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and the way he strutted past my new coordinator desk without even acknowledging my existence told me everything I needed to know about his character. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the entire weekend preparing for this moment, documenting every piece of evidence Logan and I had gathered about his fake credentials and his uncle's financial schemes. "Good morning, team," Scott announced to the marketing department, his voice carrying that entitled tone rich kids learn in private schools. "I'm excited to bring some fresh energy to this department and take our campaigns to the next level." He glanced around the room, his eyes briefly meeting mine before dismissing me like I was part of the furniture. "I'll be meeting with each of you individually this week to discuss your roles and how we can optimize our processes." Jennifer Walsh, one of our senior marketing specialists, raised her hand tentatively. "Scott, we have the Henderson Industries presentation scheduled for Thursday. Jake was the lead on that account, and they specifically requested him for the follow-up meeting." Scott's confident smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. That's exactly the kind of old thinking we need to change. Fresh leadership means fresh client relationships. I'll handle the Henderson presentation myself. My heart started pounding as I realized what was about to happen. The Henderson Industries account was worth $12 million annually, and the client had specifically built their relationship with me over 6 months of careful negotiations. Scott had no idea about their industry challenges, their competitor concerns, or the specific marketing strategies they'd requested. This was going to be a disaster, and it was going to happen in front of one of our most important clients. "Scott," I said carefully, standing up from my coordinator desk. "Maybe I should attend that meeting with you. I have all the background research and client preference files that might be helpful." "Thanks, Jake, but I think I can handle it. Sometimes too much background information can limit creative thinking." Scott waved me off dismissively. I prefer to approach clients with fresh perspectives rather than getting bogged down in historical details. Fresh perspectives. Historical details. Scott was using the same corporate buzzwords Marcus always used when he wanted to sound important without actually understanding what he was talking about. But this time his ignorance was going to cost the company millions of dollars, and I was going to make sure every detail was properly documented. The Henderson presentation was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in the main conference room. By Wednesday evening, I'd prepared a comprehensive backup presentation that covered all the client's specific requirements, industry analysis, and proposed marketing strategies. I also set up a small recording device in my briefcase, positioned to capture audio from anywhere in the conference room. If Scott was going to destroy our biggest client relationship, I wanted evidence of exactly how it happened. Thursday afternoon came faster than I expected. Robert Henderson and his 2 vice presidents walked into our conference room at exactly 2 o'clock, dressed in their usual conservative business suits and carrying the serious expressions of executives who were used to getting results. I'd worked with these men for months, building trust through detailed research and careful attention to their company's unique needs. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Scott said, practically bouncing with nervous energy. "I'm Scott Summers, the new marketing director. I'm really excited to show you some revolutionary ideas we've developed for your account." Robert Henderson looked confused and glanced in my direction. "I thought Jake was handling our account." "We specifically requested him for this follow-up because of his understanding of our industry challenges. Jake's been reassigned to other projects," Scott replied smoothly. "But don't worry, I've reviewed everything and I have some fantastic new approaches that will completely transform your marketing presence." What happened next was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Scott opened his presentation, and within the first 5 slides, it became clear that he had no understanding of Henderson Industries' business model, their target market, or their competitive landscape. He kept talking about revolutionary digital strategies and innovative brand positioning while showing generic templates that could have applied to any company in any industry. Robert Henderson's face grew darker with each passing minute. His vice presidents were taking notes, but I could tell from their expressions that they weren't impressed. When Scott suggested a social media campaign targeting teenagers for a company that manufactured industrial equipment for construction sites, one of the VPs actually winced. "Excuse me," Robert Henderson interrupted, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Are you familiar with our primary customer base? Because this presentation seems designed for a completely different type of business." Scott stumbled over his words, clearly unprepared for specific questions about the client's operations. "Well, sometimes it's important to think outside traditional boundaries and explore new market segments. Our traditional boundaries exist because we've spent 30 years building relationships with construction companies, engineering firms, and industrial contractors," Henderson replied coldly. "We're not interested in exploring new market segments. We're interested in reaching our existing customers more effectively." The meeting went downhill from there. Scott continued trying to sell generic marketing concepts, while Henderson and his team grew increasingly frustrated with his lack of preparation and understanding. By the time the presentation ended, I could see that we'd lost one of our most valuable clients. "Mr. Henderson," I said as the clients were gathering their materials to leave, "could I speak with you privately for just a moment?" Henderson nodded, and we stepped into the hallway while Scott remained in the conference room, apparently oblivious to how badly the meeting had gone. "Jake, what just happened in there?" Henderson asked bluntly. "We've been working together for months, and suddenly we're dealing with someone who doesn't understand our business at all. There have been some management changes that I wasn't consulted about, I replied carefully. I want you to know that I still have all the research and strategy documents we developed together. If you're willing to give us another chance, I can prepare a proper presentation that addresses your actual needs. Henderson studied my face for a long moment. Jake, I've worked with a lot of marketing firms over the years, and what I just saw in there was completely unprofessional. If your company thinks they can assign our account to someone who hasn't bothered to learn our business, maybe we need to look elsewhere. My heart sank as I realized the full scope of what Scott's incompetence was going to cost us. Mr. Henderson, I understand your frustration. Could you give me 24 hours to see if I can resolve this situation? One day, Jake. But if we don't see dramatic improvement, Henderson Industries will be taking our business to a firm that actually understands what we do. After Henderson and his team left, I walked back into the conference room where Scott was packing up his presentation materials with the satisfied expression of someone who thought he'd done a good job. That went really well, Scott said cheerfully. I think they were impressed with our forward-thinking approach. Sometimes clients need to be pushed outside their comfort zones. Forward-thinking approach. Comfort zones. Scott was completely delusional about what had just happened, which made him even more dangerous to the company's reputation. But his delusion was also going to be his downfall because he would keep making mistakes while thinking he was succeeding. Scott, I think Mr. Henderson had some concerns about the presentation. Maybe we should schedule a follow-up meeting to address his questions. Nah, they always act a little resistant to new ideas at first. Give them a few days to think about it and they'll come around. Scott snapped his briefcase shut and headed toward the door. By the way, Jake, I'm going to need you to prepare summary reports on all our other major clients. I want to review their accounts and see where we can implement similar innovative strategies. Similar innovative strategies. Scott was planning to destroy every major client relationship we had, one disastrous presentation at a time. But he was also giving me the perfect opportunity to document his incompetence and build a case for his removal. That evening, I sat in my apartment transcribing the audio recording from the Henderson meeting. Every fumbled answer, every misunderstood question, every moment of Scott's obvious unpreparedness was captured in crystal clear detail. Combined with Logan's evidence about Scott's fake credentials and Marcus's financial irregularities, we were building a case that would be impossible to ignore. But as I worked late into the night, preparing documents and organizing evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was planning something bigger than just installing his nephew in my old position. The financial records Logan had shown me suggested a pattern of corruption that went deeper than simple embezzlement. And if Marcus was willing to destroy the company's client relationships to protect his nephew, what else was he willing to do to keep his secrets hidden? The next morning would bring new challenges, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally fighting back instead of just reacting to Marcus's attacks. Scott's spectacular failure with Henderson Industries had given me exactly the ammunition I needed to start dismantling Marcus's entire operation. Marcus thought he'd neutralized me by giving me a lower position in the company. What he didn't realize was that he'd actually given me the perfect vantage point to watch his nephew destroy everything Marcus had worked to build. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning at 8 o'clock sharp, and I could feel the tension crackling through Xavier Storm's executive floor like electricity before a thunderstorm. Jean Gray's assistant had sent the meeting notice late Thursday evening, which meant someone had escalated the Henderson Industries situation faster than I'd expected. What I didn't anticipate was walking into that boardroom and finding Marcus sitting at the conference table with a stack of papers and the kind of cold smile that meant he'd been planning this confrontation for days. Jake, please take a seat, Jean Grey said from her position at the head of the polished mahogany table. Her red hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her green eyes held the sharp focus of a CEO dealing with a crisis. Warren Worthington III sat to her right, his perfectly pressed suit and concerned expression indicating that our financial situation was about to become a topic of discussion. Logan had positioned himself near the back of the room, officially present as head of security, but actually there to support whatever was about to unfold. Before we begin, Marcus said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when he wanted to control a conversation, I think everyone should understand the real reason we're here today. This isn't just about a client meeting that didn't go perfectly. This is about a Disgruntled employee who's been systematically trying to undermine company operations since. He was reassigned to a position more suited to his actual abilities. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, but I'd learned enough about Marcus's tactics to recognize this as his standard approach. When faced with legitimate criticism, he always turned the focus back on the person raising concerns. The difference this time was that I'd come prepared for exactly this kind of attack. Marcus raises an interesting point about undermining company operations. I replied calmly, pulling out the folder of documents Logan and I had prepared. I've been documenting some concerning patterns in our departmental management that I think the board should review. Here we go, Marcus said with an exaggerated sigh. Jake's been gathering complaints and conspiracy theories ever since he was reassigned. This is exactly the kind of behavior that made his demotion necessary. Jean Grey held up her hand for silence. Let's hear what Jake has to say, and then we'll get Marcus's response. We need to understand what happened with Henderson Industries and how we're going to prevent similar situations in the future. I opened my folder and pulled out the audio transcript from Thursday's client meeting. Yesterday's presentation to Henderson Industries was a complete disaster that cost us a $12 million annual contract. Scott Summers, who was assigned to handle this account, demonstrated no understanding of the client's business model, their industry challenges, or their specific marketing needs. Everyone has difficult client meetings when they're learning new accounts, Marcus interrupted. Scott's fresh approach might have been exactly what Henderson needed, even if they were initially resistant to change. Fresh approach, I repeated, letting the absurdity of Marcus's defense speak for itself. Scott suggested a social media campaign targeting teenagers for a company that sells industrial construction equipment to engineering firms. He recommended influencer marketing for heavy machinery. He proposed brand partnerships with lifestyle companies for a business that's been serving the same industrial clients for 30 years. Warren Worthington leaned forward, his financial background making him immediately grasp the implications. Jake, what was Henderson's response to these suggestions? They terminated their contract effective immediately. Mr. Henderson specifically said that if we thought their account could be handled by someone who hadn't bothered to learn their business, they would find a marketing firm that actually understood their industry. I pulled out a printed email. This is their official termination notice, received at 6:30 this morning. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Jean Grey's face had gone pale as she calculated not just the immediate financial loss, but the reputation damage that would spread through the business community when word got out about our incompetence. One client meeting doesn't define someone's entire capabilities, Marcus said, but his confident tone was starting to show cracks. Scott has excellent credentials from Harvard Business School, and his previous experience at major advertising agencies speaks for itself. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Actually, Marcus, Scott's credentials are something we need to discuss. I pulled out Logan's background check documentation. Harvard Business School has no record of Scott Summers ever being enrolled in their program, let alone graduating. The advertising agencies listed on his resume have no record of employing him. 2 of his professional references are disconnected phone numbers, and the third belongs to a gambling addiction counselor in Atlantic City. Marcus's face went through several color changes as the implications of my statement sank in. That's impossible. I personally verified Scott's qualifications before recommending him for the position. Then you personally verified falsified documents, Logan said from the back of the room. Speaking for the first time since the meeting began, I have copies of Scott's original application, along with documentation proving that every educational and professional claim on his resume is fabricated. Jean Grey looked like she was about to be sick. Are you telling me we hired someone with completely fake credentials to handle our most important client accounts? It gets worse, I continued, pulling out the financial documents Logan had discovered. Scott has been receiving monthly payments from Xavier Storm Industries through a shell company called Cyclops Consulting. $15,000 per month for over a year with no services provided and no legitimate business purpose. Warren Worthington practically lunged across the table to grab the financial records. As CFO, his job was to catch exactly these kinds of irregularities, and the fact that they'd slipped past his oversight made him personally responsible for the company's losses. These payments, Warren said, his voice tight with controlled anger, they're not in any budget I approved. Marcus, how did these expenses get authorized? "I can explain everything," Marcus said, but his usual commanding presence had crumbled into desperate damage control. Scott was doing consulting work for the company before he was officially hired. Market research, competitive analysis, strategic planning. Market research, I repeated. Strategic planning. For a company he knew so little about that. He couldn't handle a basic client presentation. I pulled out the bank records Logan had obtained. The Cyclops Consulting account is registered directly to Scott Summers. This isn't consulting fees, Marcus. This is embezzlement. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Embezzlement wasn't just a firing offense, it was a criminal charge that could result in prison time and destroy reputations permanently. Everyone in the room understood that we'd moved far beyond personnel disputes into potential federal crimes. "There has to be some explanation," Jean Grey said, though her tone suggested she already knew there wasn't. "Marcus, I need you to provide documentation for every payment made to Cyclops Consulting, along with detailed records of the services they provided." "Jean, you have to understand the pressure I've been under," Marcus said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely frightened. "Scott has had some personal challenges, some family issues that required financial support. I was trying to help him get back on his feet while also bringing his talents to the company." Personal challenges. Family issues. Marcus was finally admitting that the consulting payments were really bailout money for his nephew's problems, whatever they were. But his confession was making the situation worse, not better, because it proved that he'd knowingly used company funds for personal purposes. "Marcus," Warren said, his voice deadly quiet, "using corporate funds to solve family members' personal problems is textbook embezzlement. The fact that you disguised it as consulting fees makes it fraud as well." The boardroom fell silent again as everyone processed the legal implications of what had been revealed. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, apparently realizing that his attempts at damage control had actually made his situation much worse. "There's one more thing," Logan said, stepping forward with another folder. "I've been monitoring some unusual activity in Marcus's communications over the past few weeks. Phone calls to lawyers, meetings with people who have connections to offshore banking, discussions about transferring assets to protect them from potential legal action." Marcus's face went white. "Logan, you had no right to monitor my private communications. Actually, as head of security, I have both the right and the responsibility to investigate potential threats to company assets. And someone who's been stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars definitely qualifies as a threat." Logan placed the folder on the table. Marcus has been preparing for this confrontation for weeks. He knew his financial schemes would eventually be discovered, and he's been taking steps to protect himself. Jean Grey stood up from her chair, her CEO authority filling the room like a physical presence. "Marcus, your employment with Xavier Storm Industries is terminated immediately. Logan, please escort him from the building and ensure that his access to all company systems is revoked." "You can't do this to me," Marcus said, his voice rising with panic. "I built this company's marketing division from nothing. I've brought in millions of dollars in revenue over the years. You also stole hundreds of thousands of dollars and nearly destroyed our reputation with fraudulent hiring practices," Jean replied coldly. "Security will pack your personal belongings and deliver them to your home address." As Logan moved to escort Marcus from the boardroom, Marcus turned to me with an expression of pure hatred. "This isn't over, Jake. You think you've won something here, but you have no idea what you've actually done. There are people involved in this situation who don't like being exposed, and they have ways of dealing with problems that go far beyond corporate discipline." The threat was clear, but what chilled my blood was the implication that Marcus's corruption involved people outside Xavier Storm Industries. People who might not be satisfied with seeing him fired and might hold me responsible for exposing their operation. As the boardroom emptied and Jean Grey began discussing damage control strategies with Warren, I realized that solving the immediate crisis had potentially created a much larger and more dangerous problem. Marcus Lehnsher's final words suggested that his embezzlement scheme was just the tip of an iceberg that could sink more than just his career. The black sedan had been parked across from my apartment building for 3 days straight, and the two men inside weren't even trying to hide the fact that they were watching me. Marcus's threatening words from the boardroom kept echoing in my mind as I peered through my kitchen window at the car below, wondering if I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than corporate fraud. What I discovered that morning would prove that Marcus Lehnsher's embezzlement scheme was actually the smallest piece of a criminal operation that reached into the highest levels of city government and organized crime. Logan called me at 6 in the morning, his voice tight with urgency that made my stomach drop. Before he even explained why he was contacting me so early. "Jake, we need to meet. Somewhere public, somewhere with lots of people around. The coffee shop on 5th Street, the one that's always crowded with business people. Can you be there in 30 minutes? The fact that Logan wanted to meet in a crowded public place instead of his secure office told me that our investigation had attracted the wrong kind of attention. I grabbed the backup copies of all our evidence that I'd been keeping in a safety deposit box and made my way through the city streets, constantly checking to see if the black sedan was following me. Logan was already waiting when I walked into the coffee shop, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall and his eyes constantly scanning the room. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by the alert tension of someone who'd spent years dealing with serious threats to personal safety. "The FBI raided Marcus's house yesterday morning," Logan said without preamble as I sat down across from him. "Federal agents, search warrants, the whole operation. But here's the thing that should terrify both of us. Marcus wasn't there. His neighbors said he left Tuesday night with several suitcases and hasn't been back since. The implications hit me immediately. Marcus had fled before he could be arrested, which meant he'd had advance warning about the federal investigation. Someone with connections inside law enforcement had tipped him off, and that same someone probably knew about our role in exposing his crimes. Logan, how did the FBI even find out about Marcus's embezzlement? We only presented our evidence to the Xavier Storm board 3 days ago. That's what I've been trying to figure out. Turns out Jean Grey didn't just fire Marcus and hope the problem would go away. She immediately contacted federal authorities because the financial irregularities we uncovered suggested violations of banking laws and interstate commerce regulations. Logan pulled out his phone and showed me a news article from that morning. But look at this. The headline made my blood freeze. Federal investigation uncovers multi-million-dollar money laundering operation involving local businesses. The article described a coordinated federal raid that had targeted not just Marcus's house, but also several businesses throughout the city, including 3 law firms, 2 accounting companies, and a construction contractor that I recognized as one of Xavier Storm's vendors. Jake, what we thought was simple embezzlement was actually Marcus washing money for a criminal organization that's been operating in this city for years. The Cyclops Consulting. Payments to Scott weren't just covering gambling debts. Scott was a front man for moving dirty money through legitimate business accounts. The coffee shop suddenly felt too exposed, too public, despite Logan's earlier insistence on meeting in a crowded place. If Marcus was connected to organized crime, then our investigation had made us targets for people who solved problems with violence rather than lawsuits. What about Scott? Where's he in all this? That's where the story gets really interesting. The FBI picked up Scott Summers yesterday afternoon at a casino in Atlantic City. Turns out he's been cooperating with federal investigators for months, wearing a wire and recording conversations with Marcus about the money laundering operation. Logan's expression was grim as he continued. Scott was never Marcus's nephew. He's an undercover federal agent who's been building a case against this criminal network for over 2 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Scott's incompetence with the Henderson Industries presentation, his obvious lack of marketing knowledge, his complete unfamiliarity with basic business operations, it all made sense now. He wasn't Marcus's unqualified nephew trying to learn the marketing business. He was a federal agent whose job was to document criminal activity, not actually perform legitimate work. So when Marcus demoted me to make room for Scott, he was actually placing a federal agent in a position where he could access financial records and monitor company operations. Exactly. And your investigation into Marcus's corruption provided the final pieces of evidence. The FBI needed to bring down the entire network. Logan leaned across the table, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But here's the part that should worry you. Marcus escaped before the raid, which means he knows the operation has been compromised. And according to the FBI agents I've been talking to, Marcus has connections to people who don't leave loose ends untied. Loose ends. The euphemism sent a chill down my spine as I realized that my righteous crusade for workplace justice had accidentally exposed a federal investigation and potentially put my life in danger. The men in the black sedan weren't just watching me, they were probably deciding whether I represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. Logan, what do we do now? Do we go into protective custody? Do we leave the city? The FBI wants to interview both of us this afternoon. They need our testimony about Marcus's activities at Xavier Storm and our documentation of the financial irregularities we discovered. But they've also offered us protective services if we're concerned about retaliation. Protective services. Federal witness protection. The normal world I'd inhabited just a week ago, where the biggest concern was office politics and client presentations, had been shattered by revelations about money laundering and organized crime, all because I'd refused to accept an unfair demotion without fighting back. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop talking to federal agents, or your friends and family will pay the price. You've caused enough problems already. The message was followed by a photo of my sister's house taken from across the street, showing her car in the driveway and her children's bicycles on the front lawn. Logan saw my face change as I read the message. What is it? I showed him the text, watching his expression harden into something dangerous. They're threatening my family now. Logan, my sister has 2 young kids. She has nothing to do with any of this. This confirms that Marcus's associates are still active and they consider you a direct threat to their operations. The FBI needs to see this immediately. Logan was already standing up from the table. We're going to the federal building right now and we're going to make sure your family gets protection before this escalates any further. As we walked out of the coffee shop, I couldn't help but think about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A simple workplace demotion had uncovered federal crimes, exposed organized criminal activity, and now threatened the safety of innocent people I loved. Marcus Lehnsher's arrogance and greed had created a situation that was spiraling far beyond anyone's control. The federal building was an imposing concrete structure that made me feel both protected and exposed at the same time. Agent Sarah Connor, the lead investigator on the Marcus Lehnsher case, met us in a secure conference room filled with surveillance equipment and boxes of evidence that suggested the scope of this investigation was much larger than I'd imagined. Mr. Ryerson, your documentation of financial irregularities at Xavier Storm Industries provided crucial evidence for a case we've been building for 3 years, Agent Connor explained as she reviewed our files. Marcus Lehnsher was operating as a financial coordinator for a criminal organization that's been laundering money through legitimate businesses throughout the region. Agent Connor, they're threatening my family. I received this text message an hour ago. I showed her the photo of my sister's house, watching her face grow serious as she studied the image. This changes our timeline significantly. We were planning to make arrests gradually over the next few weeks, but direct threats against witnesses require immediate action. She picked up her phone and started making calls that would apparently mobilize federal resources to protect people who'd helped expose the criminal network. What I didn't know was that our meeting in the federal building was being monitored by people with access to law enforcement communications, and that Marcus Lehnsher was already planning his final move to eliminate the witnesses who could destroy him completely. The real confrontation was still coming, and it would happen in a place where federal protection couldn't reach me.